"Sit down, Grandpa, this ain't story time." The words hit harder than the sniper class expected. Laughter followed, not loud, but sharp, controlled, calculated, enough to sting. Private Beckett didn't even look up as he said it, just leaned back in his chair, arms folded, his tone soaked in mockery. He was the kind of soldier who had never missed a shot and made sure everyone knew it. His boots were spotless, his sleeves tight, his mouth looser than it should have been. Across the room, the door closed with a muted click. Warrant Officer Charles Hensley paused just inside the threshold. His uniform was older than most of the men in that room, olive drab, creased with precision, brass nameplate dulled by time. He stood straight, though his right leg dragged just slightly, the whisper of leather against tile barely audible. He said nothing, just walked, slow, deliberate, to the front of the room. In his weathered hand, he carried a single manila folder. No tablet, no tech, just the folder. He set it down with care, as if the weight inside mattered more than anyone there understood. The tension thickened like heat before a storm. One recruit muttered under his breath, "Where's his walker?" Another smirked. No one stopped them. Not even the lieutenant at the back, who shifted in his chair but remained silent. Still, the old man didn't flinch. He unscrewed a black ink pen, the kind they don't issue anymore, and began to write something on a yellow pad. His handwriting was slow, deliberate, not one word spoken. A younger sergeant near the wall watched closely. There was a twitch in his brow. Recognition, maybe. Or just respect trying to surface in a room that had forgotten how to show it. And from the back, a coffee cup met wood. Not loud, not aggressive, but a sound of attention. No rank introduction, no warm-up speech, no welcome, just quiet. Because while the others saw an old man, the brass had sent him for a reason. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, please subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. Warrant Officer Charles Hensley, 79 years old, didn't rush a thing. He moved like time owed him patience. Slow, exact, each gesture anchored by something older than the room itself. As he lifted the folder's cover, the paper crackled faintly. His hand hovered just a second longer than expected, bones stiff beneath skin that had seen desert sun and monsoon rains. No one in the room noticed the old burn scar peeking from beneath his sleeve, a pale streak across the wrist, barely visible, but permanent. He didn't speak. Not yet. Private Beckett leaned forward in his seat, lips twitching as if ready to pounce again, the sarcasm burning hot behind his eyes. He looked around for an ally, a smirk, some shared sense of superiority, and found it in the quiet laughter of another recruit 2 chairs down. The old man still hadn't acknowledged him. That seemed to irritate him more than any direct comeback would have. The overhead lights buzzed like insects in an August field. The air in the room felt stale, dry, carrying with it the muted scent of gun oil and fabric starch. From somewhere deeper in the building, a muted door slammed, followed by the click of boots on linoleum, then silence again. Hensley reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thin pair of reading glasses, unfolding them with care, the silver frames dulled but unscratched. When he finally looked up, it was not at Beckett, not at the officer in the back, not even at the rest of the class. His gaze traveled slowly to the American flag pinned neatly behind the whiteboard. He looked at it with the stillness of memory, not sentiment, not pride, but something weightier, something earned, a breath held. He placed the glasses on the bridge of his nose, then finally spoke. His voice was low, sandpaper against concrete, the kind of voice that had once given orders from under a Kevlar dome while mortars cracked the sky. "I'm Warrant Officer Charles Hensley," he said. No rank theatrics, no resume, no history lesson. "I've been asked to sit in on this cycle's final evaluations for the Advanced Sniper Training Program. I'm not here to motivate you, or mentor you, or fix you." He paused, let the quiet settle. "I'm here to decide which one of you I'd trust not to pull the trigger." That pulled the air out of the room. No one laughed. Even Beckett leaned back slightly, fingers drumming now on his thigh, the rhythm faster than before. Uncertain. Hensley didn't look at him. "I've seen a lot of young men who could shoot," he continued, his hands folded lightly in front of him, thumbs brushing. Clean, fast, efficient. Could hit a target in the dark, while their heart rate stayed under 75. He tapped the folder once, but only a few who could decide not to. The room sat still. Even the hum of the lights felt quieter. Behind the rows of recruits, Captain Reyes hadn't moved an inch. His arms crossed, his face unreadable, but his gaze never once left Hensley. He said nothing, not even when Beckett opened his mouth slightly, as if to speak, then thought better of it. A beat passed, then two. Hensley walked over to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, uncapped it slowly. The scent of fresh ink filled the air. He began to write a single word in thick, slanted letters. Judgment. No definition, no explanation. He set the marker down beside it. "Training will proceed as scheduled," he said. "You will complete your drills. You will be evaluated according to your field performance, your adaptability, and your judgment. My presence is not a ceremony." He turned away from the board and back toward the room. The lines on his face seemed deeper now, shadowed by the fluorescence, carved by time and something heavier than years. One of the younger soldiers, a quiet one near the middle row, was now sitting straighter in his seat, watching, not smirking. Beckett still hadn't said anything, but his jaw was tight. "Dismissed," Hensley said finally. Not barked, not commanded, just spoken, like something already decided. Chairs slid, boots shuffled. No one said a word as they exited. But one recruit, just one, lingered near the door. He glanced back, and Hensley, without looking up from his folder, said only this: "Tomorrow, bring your silence, not your swagger." The recruit swallowed, nodded once, and left. The room emptied. The door clicked shut, and Hensley, still standing, closed the folder quietly and sat. He didn't take off his glasses. He didn't need to see them clearly to know who would be trouble. One recruit had already decided what he thought of the old man. The morning sun filtered through high, dust-streaked windows, casting long rectangles of white light across the concrete floor of the range classroom. Dust motes drifted lazily in the beams, disturbed only by the shuffle of boots and the occasional cough. The space felt colder than yesterday, not in temperature, but in the way silence sat heavier between the rows. No one had dared speak about the old man's presence, but his name now passed in murmurs. Hensley. Some said he'd served in Vietnam. Others guessed further. No one knew for sure. He was already seated when they filed in, back straight, arms folded, the same folder on the table in front of him. His glasses rested low on his nose. He did not smile. He did not speak. He simply watched. Each movement, each exchange, each hesitation, as if he were counting breaths rather than bullets. Private Beckett arrived last, late by seconds, but deliberately so. He walked with a casual confidence that bordered on theatrical, backpack slung over one shoulder, sleeves rolled to just below the elbow. He took his seat with a slow exhale, cracking his knuckles, then dropped his notepad onto the desk with a quiet thump that seemed too loud in the room's restrained atmosphere. His eyes flicked to Hensley, but the old man hadn't moved. The instructor began the morning briefing, droning through today's objectives. Wind calculations, long-range target drills, live fire coordination. The words hung in the air like fog. As the class followed the lecture, eyes occasionally drifted to the silent observer at the front, a presence not part of the schedule, yet impossible to ignore. Hensley scribbled notes on a yellow pad in the same clean, squared handwriting as before. No one could see what he was writing. He didn't look up when names were called, but his pen paused when Beckett responded with a clipped "present." That momentary stillness said more than words. Later, on the range, the recruits stood in staggered intervals behind sandbags and spotting scopes, the air sharp with the chemical sting of gunpowder and the dull metallic scent of hot brass. Shell casings clinked against the concrete. Targets in the distance, silhouettes of torsos, dark against the beige of desert-simulated terrain, swayed lightly in the wind. Hensley stood at the edge of the observation canopy, his arms folded behind his back. He said nothing. The wind tugged gently at his sleeves. One boot heel tapped faintly against the metal grating beneath his feet, a rhythm barely audible over the shots. Beckett was paired with another recruit, a quiet kid named Lawson. He took his shots quickly, too quickly. The rounds landed with respectable accuracy, but there was no pause between breath and pull, no stillness, just speed. When the drill paused, Hensley stepped forward. His boots echoed on the metal. He leaned down toward Beckett's rifle, not to touch it, just to glance at its placement. The pressure marks in the sling, the line of the cheek weld. "You shoot like someone trying to prove something," he said, eyes still on the scope. Beckett snorted, not bothering to look at him. "Well, maybe I just know what I'm doing." Hensley straightened slowly, the joints in his back creaking faintly. Knowing isn't the same as understanding. He turned to walk away. Beckett called after him. "You want us to use Vietnam tactics next? Crawl through rice paddies and wool socks?" The words hit like a slap, deliberate and loud. A few of the recruits chuckled, not with confidence, but uncertainty, as if they were waiting to see who'd laugh first. Hensley stopped, facing away from them. For a long moment, he didn't turn, didn't speak. Then, without a word, he reached into his jacket, pulled out a small cloth case, and began cleaning his glasses. The silence grew long. The instructor cleared his throat. Back to position. The drill resumed, but the tension didn't fade. Later, during the observation review inside the class, Hensley resumed his seat without speaking. He flipped through his notes slowly, methodically. A few names were checked. One was circled, lightly, once. Beckett sat near the front now. His expression was unreadable. His knee bounced lightly, just once, then stopped. His pen remained untouched. The instructor called for open feedback on the drills. No one spoke. Then Beckett raised his hand. He didn't ask a question. He glanced sideways, then said, just loud enough, "This is who they send to evaluate us." The air thickened again. From the back of the room, someone stifled a laugh. Hensley closed his folder, looked up, directly at Beckett, and said nothing. He didn't need to. Beckett looked away first. The rest of the day passed slowly, like heat pressing through a uniform. Hensley stayed for every round fired, every score tallied, every wind flag that snapped against its pole. He did not smile. He did not frown. But by the end of the afternoon, 2 recruits stood straighter. One adjusted his grip on the rifle without prompting, and one, Beckett, had stopped smiling entirely. But the shot he missed that day wasn't on the range. It was the one aimed at understanding, and he didn't even see it pass. The next morning came with a dull, overcast sky, the kind that flattened light across the base and made everything feel washed out. The range held a muted stillness, the kind born from routine, not peace. Targets were set, scopes checked, rifles cleaned and clutched like tools of identity. The recruits moved with practiced efficiency, but an unease had taken root among them. No one spoke of the old man seated again at the observation table. No one had to. Warrant Officer Charles Hensley sat with the same still posture, the same slow writing, the same deliberate care for each movement. A thermos of black coffee rested beside him, unopened, untouched. His face was unreadable behind the thin wire frames of his glasses. The folder remained closed on his lap. He didn't need to open it. He already knew who was writing their own names into it with every passing hour. The drills resumed with single-shot scenarios, extreme distance, wind factor, staggered targets. Recruits fired in pairs, one shooting, one spotting. Beckett had already claimed his position near the edge of the range. He wore a smug grin and a headset, chewing gum like it was a performance. His spot a cold wind, but Beckett ignored the numbers, adjusting the scope himself and pulling the trigger with sharp finality. The shot hit, not dead center, but close enough for Beckett to glance toward Hensley, as if expecting a reaction. He got none. After 3 rounds, the instructor called for a pause. Recruits gathered under the canvas shade near the back of the firing line, sipping water from canteens, adjusting vests. Beckett stayed behind, pretending to check his rifle, but his eyes drifted back toward the observation area. The silence from the old man seemed to irritate him more than any critique would have. Then, casually loud enough to carry, he said, "You know, I'd ask for feedback, but I don't do cosplay Marines." The sentence hung there like smoke after a blast. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Laughter flared from 2 nearby recruits, short, sharp, hollow. One of them, Lawson, shifted awkwardly afterward, eyes flicking toward Hensley, then quickly away. The instructor turned toward Beckett, mouth parting as if to intervene, but stopped. Whether from discomfort or fear of disruption, he said nothing. The moment passed, or pretended to. Hensley remained still. Then, for the first time that day, he stood. The movement was slow, the sound of boots on gravel deliberate. He walked, not toward Beckett, but parallel to the firing line. His hands remained at his sides, loose and steady. The wind tugged lightly at his sleeves. Beckett watched him, expecting confrontation, but none came. Instead, Hensley stopped beside the target monitor and looked out over the field, as if studying the terrain. His voice, when it came, was quiet, meant only for those who had been listening closely. "I'm not here to impress," he said, "and I don't care if you impress me. I'm here to make sure your mothers don't receive folded flags because someone in this room got cocky under pressure." He didn't turn to face Beckett. The words weren't delivered with venom. They didn't need it. The silence that followed carried more weight than the insult ever could. But the tension didn't break. Later, during after-action review, Hensley attempted to offer insight on spotting coordination. He described, in clipped clinical detail, how a missed wind call in high-altitude terrain had cost 2 American lives during a mountain extraction. The room quieted, except Beckett. "I'm sorry," Beckett said, sitting with his arms crossed and his foot tapping idly against the floor. "But what war was that? The one with muskets or the one with horses?" The room erupted in brief laughter, not from joy, but release. Nervous, unsure, uncomfortable. A few didn't join in. A few just looked down. The instructor rubbed his temple, muttering something under his breath. Someone in the back, a soft-spoken recruit named Santiago, tried to shift the mood. He offered, "I think what the warrant officer's saying is..." Beckett cut him off. "No offense, man, but I didn't sign up to take lessons from someone who needs a nap after walking across the room." It was louder this time, more pointed, less joking. The tone had sharpened into something colder, something aimed to wound. The room reacted in different ways. Some froze, others chuckled under their breath. One shook his head in disbelief. No one stopped it. Hensley didn't flinch. He reached down slowly, lifted his folder, and removed a single sheet of paper. Holding it carefully between 2 fingers, he placed it on the instructor's table and turned to walk away. The instructor blinked. "Sir?" Hensley didn't answer. He walked to the side of the room, retrieved his thermos, and stepped out onto the gravel path that led behind the range building. He walked with the same slow limp, spine tall, never turning back. The instructor picked up the paper. It was a single line, neat, centered. "Loyalty under pressure reveals character, not just aim." He said nothing, but he folded the paper and placed it gently into his own folder. And still, no one stood. Yet. The midday sun had broken through the clouds, casting a harsh white glare across the open gravel lot behind the range. Dust kicked in low spirals, rising just enough to sting the eyes. Most of the recruits had gone inside to eat or rest, escaping the dry heat and tension left behind by the morning's friction. But Hensley stood alone under the shade of a rusted-over awning, the corrugated metal above his head rattling softly in the breeze. His thermos sat unopened on the bench beside him, catching the light along its dented side. He pulled at the Velcro of his sleeve pocket, revealing an old bandage wrapped with military precision. Not medical tape, but olive drab cloth, the kind used before everything became sterile and synthetic. His fingers worked slowly, methodically. He didn't seem in pain. He didn't even seem tired. Just measured. The way a man moves when he has learned how to pace his strength. From the doorway, Lawson watched him quietly, tray in hand, halfway to stepping outside before hesitating. He stood there for a moment, not sure whether to go forward or retreat. In the end, he returned to the group without saying a word, but his eyes had lingered longer than they needed to. Inside the mess hall, the atmosphere had shifted slightly. Beckett was louder now, bolder, flushed with a sense of victory he hadn't earned, but wore like a medal. He reenacted his jab about wool socks for anyone willing to listen. Some laughed, some pretended to, some just focused on their food. Even the instructor, seated with his back to the table, said nothing. But Reyes noticed. The captain stood in the corner near the mess servery, arms crossed, coffee cooling in his hand. His gaze didn't leave Beckett once. He watched the recruit as one might watch a malfunctioning scope, not yet broken, but misaligned and dangerous. He didn't interrupt. Not yet. But a line had been drawn in his silence. Back outside, Hensley bent slowly to the bench, lowering himself with the careful, controlled effort of someone whose body required negotiation, not compliance. He unscrewed the cap of his thermos at last, poured a small amount into the lid, and took a single sip. No more. The liquid steamed in the chill of the wind, and the scent of bitter black coffee carried briefly on the air. He held the cup in both hands, not for warmth, but for steadiness. A piece of paper, the same yellow notepad, rested beside him, weighed down by a rusted bolt. Written at the top, in bold black ink, was one word: discipline. He stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he picked up the pen and underlined it. Once. The range drills resumed at 1300 hours sharp. Recruits filed out, gears adjusted, helmets secured. Beckett walked with the same swagger, chewing gum again, tossing a careless salute toward the observation tower. He didn't look toward the bench. Most didn't. But Hensley was already standing, and this time, he wore full gear. The flak vest was older than theirs. The color faded. Straps buckled in places no longer manufactured. His helmet bore no insignia. His gloves were the kind used when steel was heavier than Kevlar. He had not asked to join the drill. He had prepared to. One of the instructors approached quietly, voice low. "Sir, are you sure?" Hensley's answer was immediate and soft. Yes. They didn't question him again. The recruits lined up for the simulation, a hostage extraction exercise in variable terrain. It was low speed, low risk, meant to simulate judgment under stress more than combat agility. But with Hensley there, standing silent in the final row, the exercise felt different, as if the dust in the air had thickened. He moved slower than the rest, but each step was purposeful. Every turn of his head, every scan of the perimeter, deliberate. While the younger soldiers rushed through corners, he paused, listened, waited. At one point, Beckett stumbled on a simulated tripwire marker, barely visible, a red strip buried beneath gravel. He cursed under his breath, adjusted, pressed on. Hensley, 5 paces behind, spotted it immediately and stopped. Without a word, he marked it with a single stone and moved on. No one noticed, but the camera did. By the time the simulation ended, the recruits gathered back at the starting point, chests rising with exertion, helmets off, sweat tracing down temples. Beckett was the first to declare, "Clear run." His tone carried pride. The instructors checked his footage. 2 targets hit. 1 missed civilian marker. A deduction. Hensley removed his gloves slowly, each finger pulled free with the ritual of repetition. He set them on the bench beside him and remained standing while the reviews were read aloud. He said nothing when Beckett passed him. He didn't look up when the younger man muttered, "Maybe next time, old-timer." He simply bent, tied the loose lace of his boot and stood again. He moved with the precision of a man who remembered every time rushing had cost someone their life. He didn't need to say it. because one uniform in the room had taken notice. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard, stretching rifle racks into slanted silhouettes and softening the hard edges of the concrete walkways. The light had turned golden, the color of memory, and though the air was still warm, a sharpness had crept in, as if the temperature itself could feel the weight of the day pressing down on it. The simulation drills were finished, but no one was laughing on the way back in. The recruits moved quieter now, shoulders slightly more squared, not from discipline, but discomfort. Inside the observation bay, Captain Reyes remained exactly where he had been all morning. Arms folded, back straight, one boot crossed over the other. He hadn't moved when the insults were thrown. He hadn't flinched when the silence deepened. But he had watched everything, every movement, every choice, every silence. He was a man of few words, by reputation and design. His face was weathered but unreadable, carved in long deployments, each line earned from places most of the recruits would never see. The coffee in his cup had gone cold hours ago, but he still held it like something worth keeping. He didn't blink when Beckett passed by the window, laughing again now, louder than before, as if performing for a memory he needed to convince himself was still reality. Reyes followed the younger man with his eyes, but didn't turn his head. At the far end of the corridor, Hensley walked alone, back toward the classroom. His pace was the same as it had been all day, steady, patient, unapologetic. His shadow moved behind him like an old friend. When he passed Reyes, the two men exchanged no greeting, but the captain's head tilted ever so slightly, a motion only someone watching for it would notice. Hensley, without stopping, offered a simple nod in return. It was not acknowledgement, it was understanding. Later, after the recruits had returned to barracks for the evening debrief, Reyes stood in front of the wall-mounted screen where the simulation footage played in loops. The audio was off. He didn't need it. He rewound the drill Beckett had run, watched him miss the red-marked civilian zone, push past it, and take the shot anyway. The pause between breath and trigger had lasted less than a second. The image flickered. He rewound again. This time, he watched Hensley's footage. The same drill. Slower, yes, but measured. Where Beckett had missed the marker, Hensley had found it. He placed a stone, marked it, didn't speak, just moved on. Reyes pressed pause. The frame froze on the old man's hand reaching for the stone. He stood there a while longer, arms still folded, until the instructor returned with a clipboard and the score sheets. "Sir," the instructor began, uncertain. "Some of the recruits are questioning the warrant officer's presence. Beckett especially. He's asking if the evaluation standards are still consistent." Reyes didn't look at him. His voice was calm, low, measured. "Let them ask." The instructor hesitated. Should I address it?" Reyes finally turned his head, just slightly. His jaw was tight, his eyes darker than before. "No," he said. "Let them show you who they are." Then he walked out, leaving the clipboard untouched. Back in the barracks, the recruits sat on bunks and footlockers, sharing cans of soda and low chatter. Beckett stood in the center, retelling his version of the day's drill, exaggerating hand motions and reenacting Hensley's slow movements with theatrical limp. A few laughed, but this time, the laughter was shorter. Lawson offered a weak smile and didn't speak. Santiago just stared down at his boots. Beckett didn't seem to notice. In the classroom, Hensley returned to the same seat. The folder was open now. Pages shifted gently in the air-conditioning breeze. Beside it sat the notepad. Discipline now underlined 3 times. And below it, freshly written in smaller letters. Listen with your eyes first, then your hands, then your mouth. He looked up once, at the flag, then down again, and kept writing. Captain Reyes had not said a word to him all day. He hadn't needed to, but the insult had gone too far, and now something was shifting. The next day broke overcast and dry, with a low ceiling of clouds that seemed to press against the roof of the base. Wind moved across the range in restless gusts. tugging at flags, rattling loose tin, and whistling through the gaps in the fencing like breath through old teeth. The recruits gathered early for the final simulation of the week, the most complex yet. A hostage extraction scenario layered with shifting variables, blind entries, civilian decoys, and unknown snipers in elevated positions. It was a test not of marksmanship, but of restraint, of coordination, of what Reyes had once called mental recoil. Beckett stood near the head of the group, helmet tucked under his arm, expression calm, but lit with something too sharp to be confidence. He cracked his neck, flexed his fingers, and chewed silently on a strip of gum like a man preparing for a stage cue. His partner adjusted the scope while Beckett tightened his gloves, glancing toward the command booth where Hensley sat, arms folded, eyes fixed forward. The old man hadn't moved in 20 minutes. An instructor stepped forward, briefing the room. Live sim parameters, no real fire. Weapon safety protocols confirmed. Civilian presence in Zone Alpha. Unidentified armed elements in Bravo and Delta. Rules of engagement. No kill shots unless visual confirmation is 100% clean. Penalties assessed for wrongful casualty hits. Spotters will observe. Final call remains with Sniper. He paused, then added more quietly, "This one's not about hitting. It's about thinking." The recruits lined up. The room buzzed with tension and motion. A few adjusted headsets. One whispered a last-minute reminder about corridor blind spots. Beckett just grinned. His team entered the sim zone first. Through the thick glass of the command booth, Reyes and Hensley watched the monitors. Overlapping camera feeds flickered to life. Infrared, thermal, drone view. The room filled with coded noise. Hensley leaned slightly forward, forearms resting on his thighs, eyes narrow. The simulation began. Beckett moved fast, too fast. His breathing was calm, his rifle steady, but his pace was wrong for the scenario. His partner tried to call adjustments, but Beckett ignored him, clearing corners with high angles instead of mid-sweep checks. He barked a position to his partner and advanced without pause. In Zone Alpha, a female civilian marker, wearing bright orange, stepped into partial view. Beckett didn't wait. He aimed, fired. The red beacon above the target turned blue. Penalty marker confirmed. She had been unarmed. He had rushed the shot. Inside the booth, the instructor winced. Hensley didn't speak, but his hands clenched lightly, just once. Reyes narrowed his eyes, leaned toward the intercom, and pressed the button. End sim. The screen went dark. Sirens chirped inside the training room. Beckett's voice cut in over the channel. "What the hell? We weren't done." Reyes didn't answer. He turned to Hensley, voice even. "Your turn." Hensley didn't blink. He rose slowly, boots echoing against the metal grating as he walked out of the booth and down the hallway toward the ready line. He said nothing to the recruits, didn't wait for questions. He moved like a man walking a road he'd been down before, not just in training, but in places where the cost of failure was measured in silence and stone. He stepped onto the sim floor without a word, helmet buckled, vest tight, rifle checked. His partner, Santiago, stood straighter now, uncertain but watching. Hensley nodded once. That was all the signal he gave. The simulation began again. Where Beckett had sprinted, Hensley walked. Each footstep landed without hurry, without pause. He scanned walls with slow sweeps, pivoted in silence. When Santiago called a wind factor, even though no wind existed in the room, Hensley gave a single click of his mic in response. Not to correct, to confirm. In the civilian corridor, he stopped. The orange marker stepped forward. He didn't raise his rifle. He stepped backward. A low beep sounded from the control room. Non-engagement recorded. Correct civilian identification. The simulation continued. Hensley never fired once. But when the final room was reached, a dimly lit chamber with a masked figure holding a dummy hostage, he waited. The shot window opened for just 2 seconds, then closed, then opened again. Only then did he lift the rifle. One shot, one echo. Target dropped. Hostage untouched. Simulation complete. Silence. Inside the booth, Reyes leaned back, arms still crossed. "That," he said, to no one in particular, "is what judgment looks like." Hensley exited the sim room, removed his helmet, and handed his rifle to the assistant instructor without a word. The recruits stood watching, Beckett among them, as the old man passed. He said nothing, but Beckett watched him go, eyes no longer sharp. They had widened. And for the first time, the younger soldier didn't say a thing. The training room held a strange stillness in the aftermath of the simulation. No commands, no laughter, just the distant whir of overhead vents and the occasional shuffle of boots on the polished concrete floor. The recruits lingered near their bunks and benches, suddenly unsure of what to say. There was no debrief yet, no clipboard critique, just the lingering echo of a shot that had landed cleaner than anyone expected. Hensley sat once more at the edge of the room, his gear removed piece by piece. Not hurriedly, not like someone eager to impress. He unfastened each strap with quiet familiarity, folding his gloves and setting them neatly on the bench beside his helmet. His eyes were down, not withdrawn, but inward. A soldier who had nothing to prove because the proving was already done. Across the room, Beckett stood with his arms crossed, chewing slowly on a new piece of gum, the flavor of victory absent from his face. His foot tapped once, then stopped. His jaw shifted like he had something to say, but the words didn't come. He watched Hensley, not with challenge anymore, but with something closer to study. Captain Reyes moved quietly from the observation booth to the far wall, hands clasped behind his back. He said nothing, but the recruits watched him now the way they used to, waiting for reaction, a signal, a cue. It never came. He simply nodded once toward Hensley, a gesture barely perceptible, but full of weight. A man like Reyes didn't give approval lightly, but this was different. It wasn't approval, it was acknowledgement of skill, of sacrifice, of something the rest of them hadn't yet earned. Hensley looked up, just once, and their eyes met. It lasted only a second. A flicker of recognition passed between them, silent and unforced, like two soldiers who didn't need names to understand where the other had been. No salute, no words, just understanding forged in the kind of memory only war leaves behind. One of the younger recruits, Santiago, stepped forward to collect the training printouts from the instructor's desk. As he passed by Hensley, his movement slowed. He adjusted the papers, hesitated, then offered a quiet glance toward the old man. There was no smirk, no smothered laugh, just a nod, small, almost shy. Hensley returned it. Lawson, seated near the gear rack, noticed. He glanced between the two men, then looked back at Beckett, still standing, still silent. His expression had changed. It wasn't defiant anymore. It was uncertain, and beneath that, something else. The first flicker of self-doubt, the kind that doesn't come from failure, but from watching someone else succeed with a kind of grace you can't mimic. The instructor stood at the front, clearing his throat. He began to call out the next training rotations, but the room didn't move right away. They were still suspended in the gravity of the moment. When they finally did rise, it was slower than usual, quieter. As they exited, Beckett walked past Hensley without a word. But something in his stride had changed. It was still steady, still tall, but less rigid, less performative. At the doorway he paused, turned half toward the older man, and opened his mouth. No sound came. Instead, he adjusted his collar, gave a faint breath of a nod, and stepped out. Hensley didn't follow him with his eyes. He simply closed his notepad, clicked his pen shut, and placed both gently on the bench. Then he sat, hands folded, gaze fixed on the flag at the front of the room. He had spoken no lesson, but the room had learned one. The range had quieted for the day. Most of the recruits were dismissed, filing out with gear slung low and tempers subdued. The sun had dipped low behind the western hangars, casting the yard in long shadows that moved like ghost formations across the asphalt. The light inside the classroom had shifted to soft gold, pooling against the chalkboard and glinting off stray brass casings that hadn't yet been swept. Hensley remained seated in the same chair near the front, not because he had to, but because he wasn't finished. His fingers traced the edge of the yellow notepad on the desk, the page folded at the corner as if to mark something worth returning to. The room had emptied except for a few stragglers gathering paperwork, whispering among themselves with a cautious reverence they hadn't shown the day before. Beckett stood near the lockers, his expression unreadable. He had changed shirts, run a damp towel across his face, but the tension clung to him like heat. He glanced at the exit, then back at Hensley, as if waiting for someone to say something that wouldn't come. Eventually, he stepped forward. The sound of his boots against the tile floor felt louder than it should have, echoing in the open space between them. He stopped a few paces away, arms loose at his sides, fingers flexing in restless rhythm. "You ever miss a shot, sir?" The question landed like a stone tossed in still water. Not aggressive, not sarcastic, just curious, honest. Hensley didn't look up immediately. When he did, his gaze didn't meet Beckett's right away. He stared instead at the chalk line running beneath the whiteboard, where the wall met the floor. A long moment passed, then two, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, dry, cracked at the edges, like old wood splitting under pressure. Once. Just that. Simple. Final. Beckett shifted. Waited. The silence stretched. Then Hensley continued, barely above a whisper. "My spotter was calling it in. Hill 49. Dense canopy. Enemy movement 2 clicks out. We were positioned high. Wind was steady. Scope was clear. We had a clean line." His eyes didn't blink as he spoke, his hands still resting on his knees, fingers loose but tense. Target stepped into the frame, uniformed, armed. Orders were to fire if confirmed. I took the breath, started to squeeze. He swallowed once, slow and visible. But then a child walked in front of him, 12 maybe. No weapon, just wrong place, wrong time. His voice didn't shake, but something behind it did. She wasn't supposed to be there. He let the silence hold, not to dramatize, just because some memories require silence to be told truthfully. I froze, adjusted, tried to wait, but the target moved. In that second, the girl slipped again into the shot. I pulled. A breath. Shallow. Old. She didn't walk out. No one moved. Beckett's posture shifted, shoulders dropping just slightly. His mouth parted, as if to speak, but no words came. He just stood there, arms slack, the weight of the answer pressing into him like gravity. Hensley looked up then, and their eyes finally met. "No matter how fast you are," he said, "you carry the ones you don't save." It was not said to lecture. It was simply the truth. From the back of the room, the assistant instructor paused in the doorway, listening, his eyes lowered in quiet acknowledgement. He didn't speak, just waited. Beckett nodded once, not out of agreement, but respect. Slow, unsteady, the kind of nod that means I didn't know before, but now I do. He turned without a word and left the room. Hensley remained seated. His hand returned to the notepad, and beneath the last written line, he penned something new. Every shot echoes differently. And in that moment, the entire week shifted, not because of a bullet fired, but because of one memory shared and heard. The next morning arrived with strange stillness. The wind had dropped, the clouds had cleared, and the flag over the parade square barely moved. The base looked the same, but something underneath felt altered. In the corridors of the training facility, voices were quieter, footsteps slower, as if the building itself understood that something had shifted, not in routine, but in rhythm. The recruits gathered earlier than usual, seated without needing to be told, their postures straighter, less performative. The banter that normally filled the first minutes of the morning had been replaced by silence and the occasional creak of chairs adjusting. Even Beckett sat still, hands folded, jaw tight. He stared forward at nothing, his focus fixed on the center of the room where no one yet stood. Captain Reyes entered with deliberate steps, a folder under one arm, the other hand resting at his side. His presence, always strong, now carried a different kind of weight. Not louder, not more forceful, but somehow deeper. He walked to the front without speaking, placed the folder gently on the podium, and let the silence stretch before he opened it. He looked up slowly, his eyes sweeping across the room until they landed on Hensley, seated, as always, at the edge, calm and observant, a shadow behind his glasses. Reyes nodded once. This time, it wasn't subtle. Then he spoke. "Effective immediately," Reyes said, his voice low and clear. "All recruits in the Advanced Sniper Training Program will undergo decision evaluation protocols led by field veterans with confirmed combat judgment." He paused, letting the words settle into the air. "Real veterans," he continued. "Not theory experts, not administrative specialists, soldiers who've pulled the trigger and lived with what came after." The room held its breath. He turned to face Hensley, directly now. "Warrant Officer Charles Hensley will oversee this program's final phase evaluations. His assessment is now the standard. If you want to wear the patch, you earn it under him." No one moved. No one breathed. Beckett stood slowly. Not a protest, not a challenge. He stepped forward and stopped a few paces in front of Hensley. His mouth moved like he had rehearsed a speech, but in the end, what came out was quieter than anyone expected. "Permission to retrain, sir?" The question hung there, not for approval, but for something older. Forgiveness, recognition, the chance to try again under a man he now understood could not be outmatched, because the weight he carried was not found in medals, but in silence. Hensley looked up, blinked once, and nodded. No more. Beckett didn't smile. He just stepped back into line, standing taller but humbler. Reyes closed the folder, his final words coming like orders, sharp, clean, irreversible. From this day forward, judgment is part of the shot. He looked around the room one last time. If you can't handle that, you don't belong here. And with that, the standard changed. There were no cheers, no clapping, no photo op, just the quiet recognition that the way things had been wasn't enough anymore. And the man who had stood through it all, through the mockery, the dismissal, the weight of memory, now sat not as a relic, but as the measure. The following week began with a sharp morning chill that clung to the air long after the sun had risen. The base moved as it always did, boots hitting pavement in tempo, doors swinging open on hinges worn smooth by decades of routine. But inside the sniper training facility, something had shifted. It was visible in the way recruits stood before entering a room, in the way instructors paused before speaking. Not hesitation, not fear, but respect. Earned, not ordered. At the front of the classroom, the chairs were arranged as usual, but now a small table stood by the window, not in the way, not on display, just present. On it sat a black thermos, closed. Beside it, a folded pair of gloves. And behind it, Warrant Officer Charles Hensley, seated in the same chair as always, yellow notepad resting on one knee, the edges of each page still squared with military precision. He did not speak. He simply observed. And they understood what that meant now. Beckett stood at the front of the room, no longer with arms crossed or posture cocked sideways. His stance was firm, but quiet, the tension in his jaw replaced by something steadier. He held a dry erase marker in one hand, and the other rested gently at his side. He turned to face the recruits. "This course will test your skill, your timing, your aim," he said. "But more than that, it'll test your ability to wait, to decide when not to shoot." He paused, looked toward the back where Hensley sat unmoving, then nodded once, not for approval, but for truth. That's what separates a sniper from a shooter. The room remained still, not stiff, just attentive. Near the door, Santiago handed out new training packets, each one clipped with a single-page insert. Printed on it were 3 words in bold, simple font: judgment, precision, restraint. A new code for the course. no longer just about scores. On the far wall, beside the flag, a small plaque had been mounted with care. Brass, brushed smooth, polished to a soft sheen. No ceremony had announced it. No press release had explained it. But it was there, bolted into the wall with quiet finality. It read, "Warrant Officer C. Hensley, vision beyond the scope." And beneath it, smaller, "The ones we protect should never be in our sights." That was all. No medals, no biography, just words, true ones. Later that afternoon, Hensley left the classroom alone. His walk was the same, slow, deliberate. One boot step slightly dragging, just enough to leave a trace. But now, as he passed through the corridor, heads nodded without being prompted. Not salutes, not performance. Just quiet acknowledgements from soldiers learning the cost of real weight. And on the bench outside the range, where the wind caught the flag just enough to lift it from stillness, a young recruit sat waiting, rifle across his lap, notepad in hand, watching the horizon like there was something worth protecting beyond it. He didn't say a word when Hensley passed, but he stood, and Hensley nodded back. The old man kept walking. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you are watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.